Hello and welcome to Steady as She Goes, the podcast from the Rossiter Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre. It's Sean here again, and it's great to have you with us for episode 2, being released, of course, on Christmas Eve. Thank you to everyone who listened to episode 1, shared it, and of course sent lovely messages of support to us. The response has been extremely encouraging and is very much appreciated. Particular thanks to Tom McSweeney for his support. And of course, for more maritime news, head over to listen to Tom's Seascapes Maritime podcast. Thanks also to Andrew Doherty and the Tides and Tales Facebook page for their early support of the podcast, and of course to the crew at the Holyhead Maritime Museum, who also have a great Facebook page for maritime matters. In this episode, our main feature is an interview with Terry Conlon, author of the recently published Irish Merchant Ships and Shipowners. We'll also bring you news from around the coast, ferry and port updates, some RNLI stories, and given the time of year, a moment of reflection. Our main feature in this episode, of course, is that interview with Terry Conlon. And his recent publication, Irish Merchant Ships and Shipowners, has so far been very well received in the maritime world. It's a labour of love that's culminated in a major work of over 500 pages, featuring rare photographs and, of course, excellent artwork by Brian Clare and the late Kenneth King. Terry joined me recently to discuss the book. So for this part of Steady as She Goes, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Terry Conlon, who is the author of the recently launched and published book, Irish Merchant Ships and Shipowners, which has been wonderfully received throughout the maritime world, both locally in Ireland and indeed across the water. So you're very welcome to Steady as She Goes, Terry, and you have the great honour of being our very first guest, so you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Sean. I'm delighted to be here.
So to start off with, Terry, I suppose it would be best to tell us a little bit about yourself and indeed your connection with the maritime industry.
Well, Sean, I'm a Dub. I grew up on the very north side of Dublin, out in almost farming country in those days. And Dublin was very much a maritime city. You had ship owners' offices all around the O'Connell Street area, Eden Quay, Burg Quay, all that area. Irish Lights there at Delir Street, and across the road, Dublin Port, and two doors up, B&I offices, all that sort of thing. So in those days, when people hadn't got cars, one of the, I suppose, little relaxations on a Sunday was for people to go window shopping. But they also went to see if a new church was opened, or they went for a stroll down by the Liffey. And that was always full of different ships, mostly cross-channel, near-continental and Baltic traders. And further down, you could spy the deep-sea ships. And you'd see mums and dads and kids strolling along and looking at the ships.
Very interesting. So I suppose it was hard to get away from it. Really, it was right on your doorstep and very visual. Yeah, and you spent some time in the marine insurance industry as well.
Yeah, well, I eventually ended up for my sins in the insurance world, and that evolved into marine insurance, which I absolutely loved. Not only doing big cargo contracts and all sorts of imports and exports. We're also doing insurance on ships and their liability, the old protection and indemnity clubs. So that was fascinating for me, partly because I was so familiar with the shipping industry by that stage, but also got to know an awful lot of people in the industry, a lot of seafarers, and I found them a most interesting bunch altogether.
Marine insurance, I suppose, Terry, is a part of the sector that a lot of us don't really think about, and there's so much involved. You have the cargo itself, you have the ship, you have the assets, and it's a wide ranging topic really that often gets forgotten about.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, I suppose one could say that without the marine insurance and the P&I aspect of the business being correct, ships just didn't sail. You know, financiers needed proof of insurance and all that sort of thing. So there's a whole background there. And of course, you also had the ship brokers and the cargo interests in general. Not always Irish-minded, I must say. I remember being shocked with one cargo contract I had, and after about 25 ships being advised for carrying cargoes of grain, up came an Arklow coaster. Actually, it was the Reginald Kieran. She was brand new at the time. And I said to the client, "Oh, that's terrific. See an Irish ship here now." Well, he couldn't have cared less.
Amazing, yeah. It's a fascinating sector of the industry, and something I would have studied myself, of course, in the business side of running up to my master's qualification. I think we'll probably end up revisiting the whole sector as a separate topic. But of course, we're here today to speak about this absolutely incredible publication, Irish Merchant Ships and Ship Owners. And first of all, it's a beautifully crafted book, and it's great that it was printed in Wexford, and we'll go on to talk about that a little bit later. But I suppose the first question I have for you today, Terry, is what inspired you to write the book, and what drew you personally to the subject?
Well, I suppose the interest in shipping led me, with my sort of inquiring mind, to find out about more ships. And I became quite familiar with a number of little publications which dealt with shipping, but nothing that really dealt with modern Irish shipping as a subject. They were just thrown in with British ships, and to find out who owned what was a little bit difficult. And I suppose the book was inspired by a fellow called Frederick William Wallace, who wrote Wooden Ships and Iron Men, and that was all about Canadian sailing ships. And it was very patriotically Canadian for a man who was actually Scottish originally. But he said he was trying to carve out from the great forest the Canadian trees, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I was trying to kind of cut out from the entire mercantile navy list the ships that were actually owned and registered in Ireland. And that's how, I suppose, the book got going. And also chatting to fellows who were at sea. We had mentioned some company like, "Oh, did you ever hear of the Lady Bell of Dungarvan or something else?" And they say, "No, never heard of that company." And it was partly because they were away working and they didn't keep up with stuff, and our government didn't actually do very much in promoting Irish shipping as an industry, apart from the state-owned company.
Yeah, and it's still similar today. Well, not similar, but it's still exactly the same today. I certainly feel, and I know you agree. And it kind of leads me into the next question, I suppose. And for listeners who may not realise it, how important was and is the Irish merchant fleet historically?
Well, historically, it was quite important. And for people who are interested in sail, which is a vast subject, tracing the ownership of sailing ships, there were literally hundreds of them owned in Ireland, mostly in the coastal trade. But then if you take your own home county of Wexford, they were trading to Georgia in the US of A. They were trading up to Miramichi in New Brunswick. They were trading all the way to Galatz on the River Danube. And that was replicated in many ports around the country. Even here in Skerries, there was a little ship, Bertie Mills, less than 100 feet long, and around 1900, she did 2 round trips down to Cadiz, from there to Newfoundland and Labrador with salt, and then backloaded salted fish for Genoa in Italy. And then from there, they're crossed over to North Africa and came back up here.
And as
I
you
mean,
alluded to, Terry, these were tiny ships, you know, and obviously being Wexford biased myself, I think about the likes of the Menapia and the Carlog and all those famous ships. But these were tiny, tiny ships undertaking voyages of huge seas and huge distances. And when we think about the size of the ship we operate today, these were tiny in comparison.
oh, the average fishing vessel would dwarf them today,
Yeah.
and there was no push button navigation in the old days. You went off with a compass and a sextant, and you trusted to your God and your knowledge to get you to where you were going, despite the seas and the winds blowing in the wrong direction and the currents taking you where you didn't want to go. Oh, they were really terrific fellows.
Absolutely, and I often heard stories about men who had gone away to sea, and their families actually feared that they had been lost. It was so long since they had heard from them, and stories like that. You know, I know your book really pays tribute to the seafarers themselves and their importance to the nation as an island.
Yeah, well, the dedication is to seafarers, that's for sure. But coming on from sail, we were very early into steam navigation. And of course, my book is powered ships, steam and motor ships. But in 1815, the first little steamer was built on the island of Ireland, and that was down in Cork, and she was called the City of Cork. She traded about Cork Harbour, but the point is, they had the technology to build her 30 years before the railways really got going in Ireland. And then in 1838, I think it was, the Sirius registered at that stage in Dublin, subsequently in Cork, was the first ship to steam continuously under steam across the Atlantic to New York. And Irish ships were, according to an Institute of Transport paper written many years ago, they were on average about twice the size of English ships. And that was partly due to the fact that raising capital in Ireland was easier due to an act of Grattan's Irish Parliament, as it was called in the late 18th century.
Very interesting, and you talk about size there, and I know there's some absolutely fascinating images in the book. Some rarely, if not seen prior to this, but there is one of a size comparison of the Sirius and another vessel, and I won't give too much away, but it's fascinating to see that in the book. And I suppose throughout war times, Terry, people don't realize how close the country was to starvation in many ways, and how valuable the fleet was during war times.
Oh, yeah. Well, unfortunately, there was a huge sellout of Irish shipping interests from the end of the 19th century through to, I suppose, the treaty year of 1921. And some of those were landed people who were either putting their money into their big estates in England or were finding themselves near bankruptcy in Ireland, where their estates were under pressure from partly from the days of the famine, but partly from one or two depressions, and also because the British government, in an effort to placate a restless Ireland, was breaking up the estates. So that whole raft of people, the so-called gentry, landed classes with their money, they either put their money into Britain or into the British Empire, and they took the money out of Ireland and they sold off. For example, near you, Waterford Steamship Company was sold to Clyde Shipping.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the last Clyde Shipping regular service was Waterford Liverpool. And the Duke Line of Dublin, which ran Dublin Glasgow, they sold out. And then eventually, over a number of years, you found that B&I, City of Cork, Belfast Steam, all those companies were gobbled up by the huge conglomerate in Liverpool known as Coastlines Limited.
Okay, very interesting. And I suppose, Terry, is there any particular ship owners or story? I'm sure there's lots, but is there any that you came across during the mammoth research that really stand out to you and almost, I suppose, a favorite one or one that really stands out? What's the first thing that comes to your mind as regards any
Yeah,
particular thing in the book?
yeah, I suppose when I was growing up, I homed in on the locally registered ships. You know, going around the Liffey, I'd be picking out the Irish ships. And so I was interested in the BNI and Dublin Gas and Palgrave Murphy and that. I was also very interested, of course, in Irish Shipping Limited, which was the state-owned company. And they, in fact, were very regulars into Dublin and very much in the public eye, would follow the ship schemes for schools. And every year with their annual report, they used to take 2 full pages in the newspapers. And this was terrific. But for me, wandering around, I remember for some years, every ship flying the Irish flag that I saw was registered in Dublin.
Aha.
Yeah, and then one day, well, now the Belfast ships, of course, flew the Red Ensign, but the headline was a very favourite company of mine as well. I liked their ships and I liked their names and all that. But one day I was down just where the Point Depot is in Dublin, and there was a big swell coming up the river, and there was a bit of a gale blowing, and there was a coaster alongside, portside tube, pointing down the river. And on her stern, on both sides of her quarter, it said Kerlogue, Wexford. And I
Ah.
said, being a dub, you know, Ireland was Dublin and the country.
Yes, of course, yeah.
We were a queer lot, I would say, Dublin and the country. There's a country ship. And I began to look out for them. Now, I had seen 2 Limerick ships before that, but the Plassey and the Galtee were registered in London, so they didn't really count.
Yeah.
Then I saw the Margaret Lockington of Dundalk, you know. Then the Glanmire of Cork, the Innisfallen of Cork, you know, and it began to expand. So that's really what got me interested in the whole concept of let's get the story of all the Irish ships together. Because by nature, I was a collector, not a hoarder, just a collector. I would go looking for things and I'd get photographs of Irish ships and I kept them. I have them since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, as they say.
Fantastic, yeah, and it's fantastic that you mentioned their Kerlogue there on Wexford, and of course we're based down here in the sunny southeast, and we have a natural bias towards Wexford, and there's a huge history there, and the ownership and operation of ships out of Wexford has always fascinated me, and a lot of the names around the town and the county come from the shipping trade, and I know you have a big soft spot for us down here, and you might like to just expand a little bit. Again, don't give too much away from the book, but maybe expand a little bit on the Wexford section.
Well, the Wexford section interested me because the Menapia, of course, was quite a famous ship too. She went across to Boston in the later part of the war, and when the war ended, she had been up to Montreal and back. But for me, and she was only 902 gross tons, as built, with an open bridge, would you believe? You know, a motor
Wow.
ship built in 1939. And also, interestingly enough, the first ship ever to come out of a shipyard under the Irish flag, because the war had broken out when she was delivered. And the Emergency Powers Act, I think number 3, required vessels registered in the state to hoist the tricolour. Before that, due to the Anglo-Irish Treaty and the insistence of the British, they couldn't fly the Irish flag. It was not recognised. So they were legally British ships. But anyway, the Menapia came out under the Irish flag, and she went down to São Tomé in West Africa to get
Amazing.
palm oil. And I think that was the most amazing voyage of all, because she was going down on the coast of, well, across the Bay of Biscay, 12 degrees west, down past Iberia, down the North African coast, And that was an area that was fairly rife with U-boats. And there were no particular respecter of Irish nationality on occasions. But she was one famous ship for me. And then you had Harry Wilson of Wexford. His ships were registered in England because that's where he got his finance. But I liked them as well, and I saw one of them, the Slaney.
Yes.
No, I saw the Beggarin, not the Beggarin, I saw the Menapia in Dublin regularly. She ran in tandem with the Irish header at one stage, but she was also in the phosphate trade from North Africa to Galway. And
fascinating.
Also in and out of Dundalk, and in the Polish coal trade when that opened up at another stage. So we had an active number of ship owners, all relatively small, apart from the big Irish shipping company, which when it made profits was the darling of the politicians. And when it lost money, they were all growling about it because they didn't understand shipping. They didn't know that it was a highly cyclical business. And, they dumped it in the end, as we know, which was a very sad blow.
Such a shame, yeah. And of course, our own group here at the Rossiter Harbour Maritime Heritage Centre produced, in my view, a fascinating book and a beautiful book on Irish shipping. There might be the odd copy knocking around still, but in the research and the proofread of that, I was fascinated by the history of the company and the ships, some of which had been previously declared total constructive losses, and they got them back sailing and operating again, which is testament to not only those who were managing but also those who were sailing the ships.
Yes, I dealt a bit with Irish shipping in the book, but that is the book you've just mentioned. There is the go-to book for Irish shipping. But the ships that Irish shipping bought are leased. The Americans wouldn't sell us ships in the war. They were bought at exaggerated prices, and not all of them managed to trade at the one time during the war. And of course, 2 of them were lost during the war. That's an interesting story. When you look at the finances, the amount of money that they spent when they could have bought the ships in 1938 on the then market for a fraction, 10% of the cost of what they paid.
Yeah, amazing.
No, absolutely. It's just a lack of a whole business interest. I don't think people in universities or in business or in the legal or financial world understand the shipping business, will say the way Dutch people would or the way Norwegians would. I mean, Norwegian has a smaller population, I think, than the 26 counties, but my goodness, look at their shipping fleet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about that understanding and especially as an island nation. And, I often mention the fact that over 90% of everything we eat, consume, wear, use has to come onto the island by sea. And certainly is a lack of understanding, and still to this day. Terry, moving on to another kind of feature of the book, and I know it probably didn't start out as a 500 odd page book, and you can expand on that in a moment, but one of the fascinating parts of the book is the wealth of imagery, both artistic and photographic. There's some marvelous images in there from some very respected artists, who I'm sure you'll mention, and indeed photographs from your own and other collections.
Yes, there are a number of aspects to the book, really, and the visual aspect is one I was very keen on, and the book has over 500 illustrations, and in that are a number of paintings by a great friend of mine over the years, the late Ken King. And his lovely work is there. And then somehow we persuaded Mr. Brian Fair to do some of it. And he's really excellent. And not only that, he did flags and funnel colours for me. And he made them look alive, not these very sterile, crafted flags that you see in books. He made them look as if they were waving, and he did a whole lot of those. But in the book, you'll find amazing pictures. I think my earliest picture, which I bought for £1 as they used to call them, the punt, is the Brandon of Limerick in 1854.
My goodness.
Yeah, and then a whole series of ships and odd ones. Like I was looking on eBay one day and I found some pictures of Kalmar in Sweden, there on the east coast of Sweden, and there was a picture of the harbour with the Irish willow of 1948. Gosh, I can't believe this. And another handbook I had on the port of Hamburg showed a crowded harbour scene in the port of Hamburg. But smack in the middle of it was the Lanarone of Limerick, and over on the other quay was the Orlock Head of Belfast, which was actually built in Dublin. So there's all that sort of interesting thing. And I wasn't going to put in just portraits of ships. I wanted to show ships in their working environment, entering port, leaving port, the date when I took them myself, the date of the photograph. So people would get the idea that ships aren't just things you look at. They give employment, they save money, they're part of a maritime economy, and we should be greater in that industry than we are today. For example, we've let our dry docks go. We used to have shipbuilding. I remember some of the aqua ships had been built in Cove. I remember the naval ships being built in Cove. The naval ships still managed to dry dock in that 19th century dry dock there at Rushbrook. But why haven't we got a vibrant industry, and what does the government know about it? I think that was part of the reason I wrote the book. Look, fellows, we've got our various industries. Some of them are not indigenous. This was an indigenous industry manned by Irish people who could sail the world. And, you know, what's your excuse for where it is today? Have you brought our legislation up to date? No, you haven't.
Absolutely,
you know,
yeah.
Sort of.
And I suppose similarly with this podcast, and I suppose the work of the maritime enthusiasts here in Rosslare, that's something that we're trying to highlight as well. You know, we have a fascinating history, and we should be carrying on in the same vein today to improve our maritime lot and to make sure that we future proof it. I suppose we've a lot of catching up to do, but it's never too late. And of course, we would always advocate for a dedicated minister of marine and things like that. And it's probably something that we'll get you back to talk about again, Terry, because the maritime economy, I know you have a massive insight into that and a lot of very interesting things to say about the maritime economy, but it's certainly something that we need to raise awareness of, and hopefully through your book and indeed our work here and all of the other wonderful maritime interest groups around the place, we can highlight what needs to be done, and I suppose to make sure that the work of those who've gone before us isn't lost.
Exactly. And that the offshore wind projects, if they come, will be mainly Irish, not imported ships and labour.
Yes, it gives us another great opportunity, I suppose, to reinvigorate the fleet. Although the fleet will be a slightly different fleet, it certainly gives us the chance to progress as a maritime economy and a maritime nation. Finally, Terry, and we will definitely have you back on again for further chats. But with regards to the book, what do you hope readers and listeners of the podcast take away from your publication, Irish Merchant Ships and Shipowners?
Well, I hope they understand the great history that's there, the industry that thrived at one stage and could thrive again. But if I had my way, you see, it's not ships in isolation; they're part of our history. You know, why did our ships not fly our flag? Why did so much wealth created in shipping in the 19th century leave the country? And in particular, why do we not have, say, a university dealing with the problems of maritime capital, the problems of maritime labour? Have we got any faculty of marine history in the country? And in particular, do any politicians at all understand the shipping industry. And if not, I suggest they read this book and see what has been and could be. After all, we have a few successful shipping companies in the country. Unfortunately, only one of them is flying the Irish flag on its ships, but it can be done, and we are, in a sense, the only island nation in the European Union.
Absolutely, yeah. Listen, Terry, it's been fascinating talking to you again. It was fascinating at the Wexford launch, and I know everybody was really, really interested and enjoyed what you had to say on the night. We will definitely have you back on the podcast, and we can't wait to have you back down in Rosslare again. The book is a fabulous publication. I think it's a must read for anybody with any interest in ships on the island of Ireland or beyond, and it's available, of course, from the Rosslare Maritime Enthusiasts. It's from the Heritage Centre down here in Rosslare, and we wish you all the very best with it. We think it's fabulous. We're delighted to, as a group, to have assisted you in launching it and getting it up and running, and it's been received so far very well. And I think it's a credit to you, and well done.
Thank you. Go raibh míle maith agat.
Agus tú féin, Terry, gur míle maith agat, agus we'll see you very soon.
Take care. God bless.
And thanks once again to Terry for taking time out to talk to us about his new book, Irish Merchant Ships and Shipowners. He truly is a mind full of knowledge on the topic, and we look forward to welcoming on the podcast again. And of course, the book is available through ourselves. Turning now to news from around the coast. The RNLI has announced that Joe Slim O'Sullivan has been appointed full-time coxswain at Castletownbere Lifeboat Station. Joe brings a wealth of experience, having spent 22 years at sea as a fisherman, including 14 years as skipper. Since his appointment, he has been undergoing RNLI training at the Lifeboat College in Poole, and he will undertake his coxswain pass-out in the coming months. Joe has said that he is delighted to join the team at Castletownbere and is looking forward to working alongside a very capable volunteer crew. And we, of course, wish Joe and the Castletown crew all the very best. We now have a fantastic example of RNLI support from inland communities. And a small but dedicated group of volunteers from North Kildare RNLI has raised an incredible €117,000 to help fund a new D-Class inshore lifeboat for our friends at Wexford RNLI. The new lifeboat will be named Kildara, recognising the inland branch's outstanding contribution to saving lives at sea, and well done to all concerned. Some ferry news now, and we are of course right in the middle of the busy Christmas period, and ferry operators across the Irish Sea are experiencing one of the most demanding times of the year. Passenger numbers are high, freight volumes are heavy, and the recent unsettled weather has caused some delays and disruptions on routes including Dublin-Holyhead and services operating from Rosslare. But as always, crews and port staff continue to work flat out to keep services moving, and passengers, as always, are advised to check with the operators before travelling to the ports. Looking at Rosslare Europort specifically, and it has been particularly busy in the run-up to Christmas, reflecting the strong growth of the port over the recent years. Freight volumes remain very strong and passenger numbers continue to increase, and Rosslare's role as a key gateway between Ireland, Britain and mainland Europe continues to expand. A planning application has recently been lodged with On Board Pleanála for a major offshore renewable energy hub at Rosslare Europort. A dedicated project website, rosslareorhub.ie, is now live and provides public information on the proposal and is well worth a visit. This is a topic we will revisit in much more detail in a future episode. And in our next podcast, we'll also bring you an update on ship movements through Rosslare Europort during 2025. Our chairman, John Boyce, keeps a very close eye on movements in and out of the port, and we hope that he will join us in episode 3 for an overview of the year's movements. There has also been strong activity across other ports in the southeast at both New Ross Port and the Port of Waterford. Waterford has seen steady commercial activity in recent times, with the bulk carrier MV Cape Ducato departing Waterford Lightship bound for Lisbon. The MV Bea sailed outward to Falmouth, carrying scrap metal, and a regular visitor to our shores, the Henrique Shipowners, departed for Rotterdam with containers. The MV Sunda, an animal feed ship, sailed lightship to Lipia in Latvia. A short distance away at New Ross Port, the MV Wilson Eames sailed to Liverpool carrying scrap metal. The Lafchel departed for Norfolk lightship, and the CEG Galaxy also sailed lightship for Ardrishig in Scotland. These movements underline the continued importance of both ports in supporting regional and national trade. A shout out and great thanks to our group member Michael Cusick for keeping an eye on shipping movements in that region for us. As this episode is being released on Christmas Eve, our thoughts are, of course, with all those who are at sea tonight. For many seafarers, fishermen, ferry crews, and lifeboat volunteers, Christmas is spent on watch, keeping supply lines open, keeping communities connected, and standing always ready to respond. And we think of all the seafarers all over the world at this time of year. Indeed, we think also of tragedy at sea at this time of year. And on Christmas Eve 1977, distress flares over Bannow Bay sent the crew of the Kilmore Quay lifeboat Lady Murphy into one of the most harrowing services in the station's history. Near the Saltee Islands, the storm was so violent that the lifeboat capsized twice. In the darkness and the fury of the sea, the crew battled desperately to save one another. And despite their courage, the sea claimed the life of crew member Fintan Sinnott on that awful night. We also remember the Penlee lifeboat disaster of December 1981, when the RNLI lifeboat the Solomon Brown launched into a violent storm off the coast of Cornwall to assist the stricken vessel Union Star. In appalling conditions, the crew rescued several people before both vessels were lost, with 16 lives lost in total, including 8 volunteer lifeboat crew. And now each year, the village of Mousel dims its Christmas lights in remembrance, a powerful tribute to courage and selfless service. So on this Christmas Eve, we remember Fintan Sinnott and the crew of the Solomon Brown and all those who have lost their lives saving others at sea. In this episode's Maritime book section, we'd like to mention a new book that has just been published titled Remembering the Sea-Link Saint Class by Scott Mackey, which is available through Ferry Publications. The book revisits the story of the Saint Class ferries, 4 sister vessels built for Sea-Link by Harland and Wolff. While only 3 of the quartet still survive, with one having been scrapped in recent years, the remaining vessels continue to give sterling services in places such as the Adriatic, the Straits of Gibraltar, and far-flung Indonesia, testament to their robust design and construction more than 4 decades after they were launched. This 128-page volume combines historic detail with images and narratives that will appeal to ferry enthusiasts and maritime historians alike. We'll be adding Remembering the Sea-Link Saint Class to our list for a more in-depth review in a future episode, but it's well worth a look in its own right. And now our maritime words of the week. And this week we'd like to look at the phrase to toe the line. Today we use toe the line to mean to conform, obey rules, or stick to what's expected, but the phrase has its origins firmly at sea. In the days of old, sailors were required to line up on deck for inspections, musters, or even punishment. And deck planking was of course laid in straight seams, and crew members were ordered to stand with their toes placed exactly along a seam or line in the deck planks, literally towing the line. This ensured order, discipline, and uniformity, and it was immediately obvious if someone was out of place. Over time, the phrase moved ashore and entered everyday language, retaining its meaning to sticking to the rules or falling into line. And this is just one of many everyday expressions that remind us how deeply maritime life and language are woven into our culture. So that brings us to the end of this Christmas Eve edition of Steady as She Goes. Just a reminder that the Roster Harbour Maritime Centre will reopen on Saturday the 10th of January, following the Christmas break, with our usual opening hours of 12 noon to 4 pm or 1600 every Saturday, and of course, tea and tab nabs are regularly available. We will, of course, be speaking to you prior to our reopening here on the podcast. Thank you for listening, and to those at sea tonight, and those who we remember, our thoughts are with you. Until next time, steady as she goes.
I sailed on the sloop John, my grandfather and me, around Nassau town we did roam, drinking all night, got into a fight. Well, now I feel so great, I wanna go home. So hoist up the John D. sails, see how the mainsail sets. I called for the captain ashore.